Hey there, so today we have my submission for the first challenge of this year's NYX Face Awards, and the theme was royalty. So I really hope that you guys enjoy this look and video, and if you do, please make sure to vote, and all of the information that you need is going to be down in the description, so please check that out. Thank you guys so much for all your support and for watching, and let's get into the makeup. Since I'm wearing sclera lenses for this look, I like to start with the body portion so that I can have those lenses in for the least amount of time that I can. And here I just have my little rough sketch, and I'm starting out with the NYX Wonder Pencil in the shade Dark to outline all of the main pieces of the design. I wanted to create the look of a stone castle decaying and use the natural curves of my body as a guide. And if you're ever unsure of what you want to do, I always recommend looking at a bunch of reference photos to see what you like and don't like, and play around with the designs, create a sketch. It's always really helpful. After the outline's done, I'm applying the NYX SFX cream color in black to the entire design, applying just a small amount using a round face brush and then blending it out so we have just kind of a thin film of black. Then over top of that, we're applying the SFX cream color in white, again stippling on just a small amount, and then we're blending that out until we have a nice gray. And then once I was happy with the color, I just took a makeup wipe and cleaned up around all the edges. Now that the base is done, we need to set that cream makeup in place, and I'm using the SFX Set Loose Setting Powder. I'm applying a generous amount with a powder puff first, and then using a big powder brush to brush away any excess. Next, we're going to start marking out some of the details using the NYX Nude Matte Shadow in the shade Confession. And I'm applying that with a small angled detail brush. And I find that using an angled brush like this one can be helpful when you're doing a lot of detailing on a big area like the chest and shoulders, so you can use the brush at all the different angles where you have curves and kind of hard to reach areas. I first created the window shapes starting at the center of the chest. I knew I wanted this bigger pointed arch at the center and a few smaller window shapes to the left and right of that. I also added a border and two smaller windows inside that center shape. I added lines inside the border of that centerpiece, and those are going to be the stones that make up that border, and then I also created the shapes of the stones inside of that centerpiece. We're then defining all the outlines of the main design, and then as we did to the centerpiece, we're creating all the stones. And we're literally building this design up brick by brick, individually outlining each stone. And you can create whatever shapes and sizes of stones that you want to, create bigger gaps between some than others. We don't need to get super detailed here. These are just kind of the basic shapes that we want. I'm mostly creating these stones horizontally, but I'm curving up as I go around the neck, and we're going to do that a little bit on the shoulder as well, following the natural curves of the body and then gradually transitioning back to horizontal. And as I go along, I'm gently brushing away any fallout from the eyeshadow. I created some really small stones on this part of the design, but in the end I didn't really love the look of that, so I just recommend keeping the stones pretty much the same size even in any smaller areas. Once those outlines are complete, we're going in with the NYX Epic Ink liner in black to really define all our lines and shapes. This liner has a flexible brush tip, so you can create super nice thin detail lines or thicker where needed just by changing the pressure on the brush or the direction that you apply it. Here's where we can really define the shapes of all of the stones, rounding out the corners and darkening any gaps where we want to. Again, I'm lining each of these individually so nothing looks too uniform. I didn't want many, if any, perfectly straight lines or sharp corners. But again, you could create whatever shape of brick or stone that you'd like to. For the stones around the border, I'm just defining the lines for now, and then I go in later to carve out the shapes. And then after that, I'm lining around all of these borders and the stones as well. This was my first time trying out this eyeliner, and I have to give it a major shout out because it lasted through all of the black outlining that you see in this look, both on the chest and the face, and it could have gone even longer. It dried down nice and matte, and it didn't crack, so I'm really impressed with this one. And then before I finish the rest of the outlines off camera, I'm adding super thin shadow lines onto each of the stones as well. These go around the inside of the stones following the curves of each, and this is going to help the stones look a bit more dimensional. You want to try to line each of these slightly different so they don't all have the same curve in the same spot going in the same direction. And I'm adding one longer line to most or a couple smaller to some, but either way I'm not creating a solid line going around the entire shape because I find that it kind of breaks the illusion and just kind of looks like a circle in the middle of your stone. We finally finished all the outlines, and now we're going to start adding some shading, and I'm starting out with another nude matte shadow. This one is in the shade Dance the Tides, and I'm first blending that onto that very center portion of the chest piece, and then topping that off with the darkest shade from the Highlight and Contour Pro palette. I then applied Confession around the inside of the window outlines, blending in toward the center of each, and then added the NYX Primal color in Hot Black, closest to the outlines to deepen the shadows. Going back in with Confession, I applied that along the inside edges of the border and blended in toward the center to create a bit more depth. I'm then adding shading to the other windows as I did before, focusing those shadows to the side where we created the thicker black line, and then decided to add some contouring again using Confession. So I contoured in the cleavage area and around the collarbones and neck, and I also added some shading around the outside of that center border to help that shape pop forward. To this smallest window, I'm adding some shading lines coming out from each of the corners, then in a soft rectangular shape to connect those lines just to give it some extra dimension. I then went back in with that Epic Ink liner to redefine some of those black lines. Then going back in with the Hot Black eyeshadow on a small blending brush, I'm shading around the inside of the entire stone portion. This made the stone appear to be underneath the skin. I blended this down into any areas where I wanted to create a deeper shadow, and I used my contour brush again to blend everything out and then contoured underneath my arms using the black. I then went back in with the contour shade and applied that along all of the outer edges and used a clean buffing brush to help blend it out. I used this shade to contour around the outside of the arms and shoulder where my natural skin is showing, and then I'm just using that contour brush again to help blend everything out. Now we're finally finished with the body and are moving on to the face, and for the stone pieces we're going to follow the same steps as before, but I decided to use a black eyeliner for this outline so that I could see it a bit better because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I roughly followed the curve of my cheek up onto the temple and then down my right brow, and then for the top part I wanted to create a bit of a crooked crown shape since this is going to kind of represent my crown. Once the basic outline's done, I'm applying my foundation, and for this I'm mixing the NYX Total Control drops in shade Light Ivory and Natural, and I'm applying that using an angled face brush everywhere outside those outlines we just created. I blend this down onto the neck and then continue to build it up until I'm happy with the coverage. I then realized I didn't really want to do my foundation yet because normally I'll put my mascaras in first, but I just continued on and everything was fine in the end. I then used the same SFX setting powder to set the foundation in place, making sure to blend out any creases around the eyes before powdering. And again, I'm using a clean powder brush to swipe away any excess product. To contour, I'm using the second shade across in the Highlight and Contour palette, and I'm contouring the cheeks under the bottom lip and a little bit around the nose. Then I applied a bit of HD blush in the shade Intuition to the apples of the cheeks, blending that out into the contour, and then we're moving on to the process of the stone pieces. First applying a light layer of black, then adding white to create the gray, and on the left side I'm going to blend that base color back into my hairline. And I'm switching to a smaller flat brush to get into the smaller areas and along the edges. Going back in with the SFX Set Powder to set that in place, then with Confession to define the outlines where needed and to start creating the stones. Then as we did before, we're using the Epic Ink liner to really define everything. And when I outlined the stones this time, I decided to add those little shadow lines as I went along to help speed up the process. I'm then using Confession to contour the stone pieces where we would normally contour the face, then the hot black to add shading around the inside of the pieces. And I'm blending a bit of that under the ear and then using a buffing brush to help blend everything out. And same thing with the contour shade around the outside edges of the stone. It was looking a little dark, so I went in with the NYX Hot Single in Whipped Cream, which finally broke on me when I opened it to get the product shot. But it's a matte white eyeshadow, and I'm just adding a bit of that for highlighting to the center of some of the stones, mainly focusing on the ones that are around the center of the forehead. Now that we've finished all the stone, I went ahead and popped in my lenses, and these ones are actually made for a White Walker if you're curious. And then to highlight the face, I'm starting out with the lightest shade of the Highlight and Contour palette, which wasn't enough for me, so I went over that with this Icy Champagne shade from the Strobe of Genius palette, applying it to the tops of the cheekbones, the Cupid's bow, and the nose. And I usually don't highlight the tip of my nose because it's uneven, but I got a little excited and it just kind of happened. And apparently that still wasn't enough for me because I went in with the Prismatic shadow in Frostbite to top off the highlight, and I added a little bit of that onto the chin as well. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for the eyes yet, so onto the lips I started out with the Suede Lip Liner in Jet Set to line and fill in my lips, and then I applied the Liquid Suede Cream Lipstick in Stone Fox over top of that. Moving on to the eyes, I started out with the black eyeshadow base and used my finger to pat that onto the lids, blending it up toward the inner part of the brow as well as the contour of the nose, using both my finger and a clean, fluffy blending brush. Once I have that down, I'm adding some of the product to the brush and stippling over to start building up the color, and then blending it along the lower lash line as well, smudging it down onto the cheekbone. I'm continuing to build up the color and smudge it down until I'm happy with it. And then I'm packing this super gorgeous pigment in the shade Constellation onto the lid, and I'm focusing that on the center and just using my finger to blend the edges out into the black base. I couldn't resist adding a bit of sparkle, so I went in with another pigment, this one in the shade Diamond, and again used my finger to apply that to the very center of the lid, blending out into the blue and building it up to intensify that highlight. I decided to add a little bit of this down where we smudged the black base and onto the center of the bottom lip as well, again adding more to intensify and then using my finger to help blend it out. For the brows, I'm using the Lid Lingerie in shade White Lace Romance, and I'm applying that to the brows and brushing through them backwards as well to give them kind of a wild, icy look. I decided to apply this to the center of the bottom lip as well, again using my finger to blend and then topping it off with that diamond pigment. Now that the first layer is dry, I added a bit more to the brows to build up the product, and then I curled my lashes, and to intensify the black around the eyes, I went back in with the hot black Primal color and applied that along the lower lash line, smudging it down onto the cheek, then applying it to the inner part of the eye using a buffing brush to blend it down to contour and thin out the nose slightly, and I also added a bit of that under the tip of the nose and below the bottom lip, and lastly applied it to the outer corner, blending up into the crease. I then lined my waterline top and bottom using a black eyeliner, and I like to set the lower waterline in place, so I used the hot black eyeshadow for that and applied a bit of the Badunkadunk mascara to my top and bottom lashes. I then put on a white lace front wig, and we are finally done. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to check all the info down in the description if you would like to vote to help me get through to the top 20. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for all the support you show me. I appreciate you guys so much, and I thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.